Welcome back to the 100 Hours in About an Hour podcast. I'm Brendan, and unlike most JRPG protagonists, I actually have two parents. And with me is Brock.
Hello, and welcome to the podcast.
I figured I'd start using that list of jokes we made, like during the first week that.
Oh yeah, man, I
Yeah,
forgot about that. You're gonna have to send it to me. Maybe I can add to it
yeah,
somewhere.
yeah. I'll send you the Google Docs link.
Yeah. So, what have you been up to this
Well,
past week?
I think I talked about it last episode, but I believe the day we recorded the last episode, like the very next day, a game I've been waiting for a long time came in the mail. It actually got here a day early, thanks NISA America, or
Yeah.
NIS America rather. And so I talk about the Legend of Heroes series a lot. Usually when I'm trying to make examples, like the last episode of the shops. And this week, this last week rather, the fourth game in the current story arc came out. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
which get ready for the whole title. It's The Legend of Heroes: Trails of Cold Steel 4.
Huh.
Yeah. And we were talking about it before the podcast. I've been having a lot of fun with it, but it's actually getting kind of hilarious how large the cast is now.
Is it just like a ensemble cast of? Trying to think of a comparable movie where there's just like too many
Well,
paid big stars or whatever.
it's a larger cast than in Marvel's Avengers Endgame, so
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's a good one. That's a good example.
literally larger. I think my current selectable party, which is going to get bigger,
Of course.
is like I want to say 16.
Oh,
Yeah,
I mean that's about like Final Fantasy VI.
yeah, but it's gonna
So
get
it's not
worse.
too big.
So
Yeah.
Trails of Cold Steel 4 is basically like the culmination of every other game in the series up until this point.
Mm-hmm.
So the main villain, and this isn't really a spoiler at all because it's obvious that it's going to be him. But there's this guy called Chancellor Osborne, who's like in charge of basically the Holy Roman Empire, essentially.
Hold on, are you telling me the Chancellor's a bad guy in an
Yeah,
RPG?
yeah.
Okay.
The Chancellor of an Empire is a bad guy. Who would have thought?
Wow.
Um, so he's basically been built up since the second game in the series, I believe. Yeah, since the second game in the series, which was all the way back in Trails in the Sky, as like this big kind of evil guy, and he gets progressively more evil as the game series goes on.
Of course.
Yeah, yeah. And so my point is it's like all the characters from every different arc are coming together. So I think my final party is probably going to be like 30 something.
Nice.
Probably. I'm trying to do the math in my head of how many characters there are from each series that actually showed up. Because not every character from like every game is in this game, but most of them are.
Now is the Trail Series one where like your party splits up, so you have to have like basically two or three parties at a good level, or can you just use like one party size worth of characters and be fine?
For most of the game, you can just play with one party, but everyone levels up when they're not in the party, so that isn't an issue.
Oh, okay.
And like characters auto level if they leave your party and come back.
Oh,
Yeah.
wow.
So
So they don't try and make the player miserable.
no,
Interesting.
they don't. The only issue is like I know the final dungeon it's gonna make me like split my party up into like three different parts or something, and so I'll have to outfit at least four parties or three parties rather,
Gotcha.
which is kind of annoying with equipment, but yeah,
Yeah, it's whatever. It's the final dungeon.
yeah. I actually really like the way they do like the mega dungeons and trails, which has only started since Cold Steel 3 really. So in Cold Steel 3 they there's a dungeon. I want to say, well, okay, so they started out, there's a dungeon I think in like three-fourths of the way through the game where you have to split your party up into two different parties.
Hmm.
And the way the dungeon works is like you have to solve like a puzzle on one side to open up the next area on the other side. You have to switch back and forth, so it's kind of fun.
Yeah,
Yeah, I think Final Fantasy 6 does that.
it does multiple
Yeah,
times.
yeah.
It does it once in the Phoenix Cave where you have 2 parties, and then in Kefka's Tower you have 3.
That's the same as Cold Steel 3 then. That's kind of funny.
Yeah, literally ripped it off.
Out of necessity, because there's too many characters.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then in Cold Steel 4, they've already done the multiple party dungeon thing, and I'm sure they're going to do it a couple more times.
Gotcha.
It's just a way to
Yeah.
make every character relevant without just having a giant, like, escorting cast doing nothing.
Yeah, that's fair. It's just annoying. It's like you said, it's annoying when you have to like re-equip like 12 people or whatever with updated equipment.
Yeah, the problem with the Trail series specifically when it comes to this is so every character has this orbment system, which is kind of like materia in Final Fantasy VII,
Mm-hmm.
where you give them these gems that affect how their character is built. And so the Trail series, I think everyone has like, I want to say 8 slots for these gems.
Okay.
And it basically like you want to give like the magic user stuff that boosts magic and gives them spells and stuff like that. So you have to make sure everyone has an optimal set of those, which is kind of a pain at the end. But they do have just a button that auto equips them, which I've been guilty of using.
Yeah.
Where you can just tell them make this character good at magic, and it generally
Yeah.
does a good job.
Yeah, why not, right?
Yeah, well, especially because the game developers realized like you're not going to have super optimal parties, so they give a little bit of leeway when you do the split up dungeons. They're not really that hard.
Yeah. That's cool.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's been my week. I had like some time off from work because of COVID nonsense, so I
Gotcha.
want to say I spent 20 something hours in the game already.
Nice, man. I so like I'll go on a walk like pretty much every day just because like I don't have anything else to do, right?
Yeah.
I don't want to get out of the house. And there's a barcade probably like 5 to 10 minutes away from me, and they like opened up, but you have to wear a mask and all the other COVID stuff
Yeah.
or whatever, and they wipe everything down. But they have a Time Crisis 3 cabinet, and so I was like, man, like I really like Time Crisis 3, but I never beat it because the last time I freaking played it was like 10, 15 years ago, right? Like I never had it on PS3 or whatever. I only played it in the arcades.
Yeah.
So it's just like, you know what? I'm just going to get like $5 worth of quarters and sit down and beat this. And I beat it. And I was like, oh, that isn't as bad as I thought it was. And so now, like, probably every other day when I go on a walk, I'll pop in and just take like 10 to 12 quarters in there with me and like beat the game. And in the past couple weeks, I've set the solo high score on both cabinets, and then I beat the co-op high score by myself.
But just
In
dual
the-
wield guns.
No, I just was playing with one gun and beat 2 people that were playing with 2.
Ah.
But I think like you get like if you're playing by yourself, you get a little bit more points than normal because like the CPU does stuff apparently. Like my solo co-op high score is higher than my solo high score, and I don't know where the extra points came from. But either way, like I beat the 2 people that had it, and like at the arcade, if you have a high score in the arcade, they'll take your picture with like a little Polaroid, and like you write your name and your score and stick it up there. And so like at first I wasn't going to or whatever because I didn't really care. But like when I set a high score last night, there was someone standing there who's like, dude, nice, man. And I was like, yeah, thanks. And I went over to the bar, and like one of the light guns was kind of like acting weird or whatever. I told the bartender, and she's like, oh, wow, you're the one. Like one other person told me about that, but like I thought they were just like an idiot or something. And I was like, well, I just set the high score with it. So like I'd like to think like I'm not a moron or something. She's like, oh, okay, well, you want your picture? I was like, nah. And then I was there for like another hour. I was like, you know what? Like, screw those 2 guys that have their picture up there. I beat them by myself. I want my dang picture. And so, like, I stood there and I, like, stood in between both, like, guns or whatever. And I picked up both of them, like, held them, like, cross-armed in front of me.
Nice.
You know?
I hope they just put 2 pictures of you up there.
Nah, I asked her, like, should I have, like, 3 pictures? Should I have a picture for each solo and then a co-op or whatever? And she was just, like, her eyes kind of glazed over because she's just like, I'm not dealing with this right now. Because like she took my picture, right, and then she's like, "Oh, well, this is a co-op one. Like, should I have yours next?" I was like, "No, I beat them by myself." And she's like, "Oh yeah, no, then they can come down. Like they're morons or whatever." So that was a nice little, gamer morale boost.
A gamer moment, but like a
Yeah.
good one.
And then kind of segueing into the topic of the week, the other thing I did just kind of spontaneously, I was going to say out of spontaneity, but that didn't really make sense. Um, I had a stream up and I just was like kind of in that weird, like, I don't know what I want to do while I'm sitting at my computer moment, right? I don't
Yeah.
know what game I want to play. And I have Romancing Saga 3 installed, the remake on Steam. And I had quit at the final boss. Like the final boss walled me.
Okay.
And so I just opened it up and like messed around for like 30 minutes and then fought the final boss and killed it out of nowhere. After like being walled on it for probably like 5 to 10 hours of attempts a few months ago, like I just beat it on my either first or second try. I don't remember.
Well, that'll do it. Sometimes
Yeah,
you just need
and
a
then
break.
yeah, that was really weird. And then I like uninstalled it and I reinstalled Romancing Saga 2 last night, and that's going to be my like mess around for 20 minutes when I'm kind of like waiting on something.
Yeah, it's a good game for that because you can save wherever.
Yeah. But the so that kind of gave me the idea for the topic this week is just like final bosses. What makes a good final boss? Stuff like that.
Yeah, and we can talk about the typical cliche of final bosses almost immediately. Is inevitably a JRPG series is going to have God be the final boss of some variety of a deity.
Oh, I was more thinking like mechanically.
Well, we can talk about that too. I just had to bring up the joke because
Oh, I thought you were going to say like a multi-stage boss.
no, I mean yeah, I mean that God bosses usually are multi-stage.
Yeah. I
Uh,
mean, SMT 4A, well, I mean, multiple SMT games like have like some equivalent of like the Abrahamic deity as their final boss, but like then you read it and it's like, oh, well, it's not the actual one. It's just some representation in the multi, and you're just like, whatever. Like, I don't understand whatever parallel they're going for, but it's like, they just call them God kind of deal.
they have to. It's probably something like to do with laws in Japan or something.
I don't know.
Because at the start of Persona 5, they have to like make sure to tell you that this isn't real people.
Yeah. I don't know, but like SMT4A is definitely one I want to talk about. I don't know if you've played it or not,
I
but
haven't. Yeah, we've talked about this before.
oh yeah, you're not an SMT boy.
No.
Shameful.
Sure.
And then I can also talk about SMT4 and why final bosses in that aren't good.
Well, the whole
So,
game's bad.
that's not true. Like the first 10 hours are good.
Okay, I can agree with that.
And then as soon as you get to Tokyo, you have really, really good music and then the gameplay dives immediately.
Yep. That was my experience.
But so the first boss I actually want to the first boss I want to talk about is actually Romancing Saga 2, which I know you're playing, so this might kind of a spoiler for you.
I mean, I can guess. Final boss.
But it's I mainly want to talk about like mechanically what makes it a cool boss.
Okay. Well, I'll forget by the time I get to that. So
yeah. So it is the hardest final boss in an RPG I've played that isn't like a secret unlockable conditional boss. Like it's just like the required mandatory final boss, and it's the hardest one I've beaten, I think. And the reason why it's difficult is because it actually incorporates all of the other major bosses. Kind of like imagine Lavos from Chrono Trigger.
yeah.
But instead of as you damage it, it phase changes and just changes into that boss. It just adds that boss's pool of moves to its repertoire, and it gets another turn.
Oh, well, another turn part's the nasty part.
Yeah, because like there's like in Romancing Saga 2, the main villains are the seven heroes.
Yeah, yeah.
I don't know why they're called the seven heroes or whatever.
Because they were supposed to be the heroes originally, I think, and they just decided to go evil.
They're supposed to, but like the narrative in that game is like garbage. It barely explains anything. But the final boss, it starts out and you see like one of the heroes kind of like sticking out of like this like amalgamation sphere thing, and it just does one move a turn. Then you start damaging it, and the second piece comes out and it does two moves a turn. Then 3, then 4, then 5, then 6, then 7. And it just gets to a point where like it's just like a DPS race. Like you cannot heal, you cannot tank the damage unless you can, and I'm just a freaking smooth brain moron. But like that boss, is so cool because it incorporates everything from the other bosses. So if you learned like, you know, one of the bosses is this female that like will charm your party, but she only charms males. Like she can't charm girls. There's no lesbians in Romancing Saga. So like if you go into this final fight with no males, then you're immune to the charm move. Or like if you sparked immunity to one of the bosses, a previous boss's move, you can put it on your characters and then you'll dodge that move in the final boss fight. So it's just like a really, really cool callback of like putting together everything that you've learned throughout the rest of the game, and it still like doesn't pull punches.
I mean, it basically tells you that too, like on the first boss you fight in that game.
Which
like,
part?
Well, when you fight the first hero and like you lose, like the king basically like gives you the ability to not die to it.
Yeah.
By being able to dodge its like main bad thing.
Yeah, it's like soul drain or whatever.
Yeah. So it kind of carries that over to the final boss.
Yeah. But that just when that happened, like, and the boss started using all the old moves, and I just happened to have like some defensive sparks on characters, and I was like dodging. I was like, oh, that's really cool. And then it turns out the boss was like impossible because I had misunderstood the magic system and was really under leveled magic wise, and I had to go like grind a few spells to make the boss doable. But even then, like it was like it's a case of like you have to cheat the game because the game is going to cheat you with how unfair it is, kind of deal.
Yeah.
Like the game expects you to use like super overpowered stuff because it's overpowered. But the boss itself was like super satisfying when I beat it. And it was just like a really, really good conclusion. And the fact that the boss wasn't a joke. I think that's the biggest thing, is when the final boss is easy and there isn't even like a challenging boss in the last like 10% of the game. Like if you're in the final dungeon and like none of the bosses are hard, including the final boss, that's not fun. But even if there's like the next to last final boss, as long as they're doing something hard or interesting, I think that really helps elevate a game.
Yeah, that's actually my biggest complaint about the newest Legend of Heroes games is the final bosses have not been great lately.
Yeah.
Mostly because they made characters too powerful. So it's more of a whole system design problem than final boss problem.
Uh-huh.
Because like in Cold Steel 1 and 2 at least, if you have a good setup on your party, like a cheese setup, you can just one-shot the final bosses on Nightmare, which is the highest difficulty. Fun. So it's a joke, which makes it not like impactful at all.
Yeah. I'm trying to think of another. So another final boss that kind of was also would have been difficult if I didn't cheese it, but wasn't satisfying, was the final boss of Grandia 2.
Yeah.
Specifically, I was playing on hard, which Grandia 2 on hard is weird because there isn't like an actual documentation of like what's changed between the difficulties. It's just like, oh, the game's just harder. But there's like 6 or 7 bosses where like if you Google like that boss name Grandia 2, like Google will autocomplete like hard mode help. Because there's just like 6 of them they just made the game like those bosses way harder. And the final boss just moves really, really fast. He just has a super high speed, so it's just going to go way more off than you. And like, I don't know what you're supposed to do other than do this one thing, but a character has a special move that will like temporarily paralyze an enemy, and it works on the boss. So you just stun lock the boss for the entire fight. And if you don't do that, I don't know how you beat that boss other than be extremely overleveled. So that was like the opposite thing of like, it just wasn't fun.
Yeah, I couldn't tell you because that's what I did too.
Yeah. And I like did it on accident. Like I was just like trying everybody's moves because I was just like, this junk's impossible. This dude's moving like 2 times for all of my character's moves. Like I can't interrupt him. He does a ton of damage. He has 1 billion health. And I just like used everybody's special moves. And then this move happened to like paralyze him. And the move has like a super long FMV cutscene.
Of course it does. It's Grandia too.
Yeah. And also like just in general, that the ending of that game, you think the game is over like 3 different times, but the game keeps going. So like by the time you get to the final boss, you're just like, I just want this game to be over with, man. Like I thought it was over with when I beat this guy, but then the game kept going, and you're just like tired of playing the game at that
Yeah,
point.
I know the exact point you're talking about too. Um, it's
So
like
it's like,
you kill
go
that
ahead.
one boss and then like you don't really know where to go.
Yeah, but it's like you get to the final boss and you're just like, dude, I had to do a boss rush to get here after I thought the game was over, and this boss is BS. I thought I was going to be done like 3 hours ago, but I've been playing the game for 6 hours because I don't want to drop it right before the end of the game because then I don't want to load the game, beat it, and then be done and like have to figure out what else I'm doing. I'm like, you're like stuck. The game has you trapped.
Yeah.
So it's just like every single thing is wrong, other than the fact that the boss isn't a joke, but it's you have to cheese it basically.
Yeah. The nice thing about Legend of Heroes games is you typically know what the final where you basically know the final dungeon's coming, and so like I always just save the final dungeon for my last session of playing it.
Yeah.
It's it's always obvious because like they make it like comically easy to tell who the final boss is going to be.
Mm-hmm.
Like they're not like one of those games where it's like surprise, it was me. I mean they do that, but like they do it before the last hour of gameplay.
Yeah. Um, Another final boss that I think is like really good that I think, anyone that hears the topic of final bosses is probably going to expect this one to be brought up is Kefka.
Oh yeah, well him as a character is just good.
Like the game itself does an extremely good job of building up the narrative of like it does pull the bait and switch in the first half, right? Where you're like, oh, the Gestalt is the bad guy, whatever. Kefka's just like this. The game tricks you into thinking Kefka is going to be like the Gilgamesh of Final Fantasy
Yeah,
VI.
just a harmless idiot, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and then it turns out he's actually an evil psychopath that like betrays everyone, is insane. Like all the. I don't need to tell you guys about Kefka. If you're listening to this, you probably know. I think
Yeah.
maybe,
He's just the
but
Joker.
yeah, he's the Joker. We live in a society. He's super edgy, all that kind of stuff. But the entire second half of the game is just like, look at all of this devastation Kefka wrought. You're getting the band back together to go stop Kefka. You have to climb through his freaking tower. There's a giant narrative, and then you get to the fight itself, and it's just a 4-stage monstrosity of like all this religious and historic symbolism, along with like a 4-part like operatic, for lack of a better term, like epics, like prog song.
Yeah.
And the fight itself like isn't even really hard because the game is like super easy,
Yeah. All the
but everything else around it just carries it to where like, and I'm saying the fight's not hard because like I had Ultima and all this stuff. I'm assuming if like you're just kind of playing through the game, you don't know how to find all that, it might be harder. I'm not 100% sure.
it depends on what you're comparing it to. I would say every Final Fantasy since 4 is pretty easy.
Yeah. But I guess my point is like the boss itself, it isn't a hard final boss. It's just a final boss. And if you're doing all the optional stuff, it's a trivialized final boss. If you go straight to it pretty quick, it's pretty hard. But it's not like this soul crushingly difficult. It's a narrative final boss, but the narrative around it is so good that it doesn't matter how hard it is.
Yeah, well, I think you have to have either a really good narrative leading up to a final boss, or it has to be brutal. Like if you don't have either of those things, it's kind of like a letdown.
Yeah.
Um, like Etrian Odyssey games don't really have any sort of lead up to the final boss ever.
Yeah.
But they're usually difficult enough that it feels satisfying when you fight them anyways.
Yeah. I would say that's also like part of why I don't know, even like Final Fantasy V, like X Death, it doesn't feel like they try and build him up, but like X Death just isn't like a cool enough villain. Like, yeah, he like splits the world or he reunites the world. I'm sorry, he does the opposite of
Yeah, it
Kefka.
makes a bunch of void happen. Yeah.
Yeah, he reunites the world, he makes the void happen, but like, I don't know, it's just not as cool. Maybe it's because it's not like a super multi 4-stage tower boss fight. It's just like a giant blob thing that you just kill really quick because it's really easy to be broken in Final Fantasy V. I don't know.
Well, the thing with that with FF5 is like the narrative in general is just like it's there, but
It's like Saturday morning cartoon level.
yeah, it's just all the writing is very simple and usually pretty comical. So
Yeah.
like I mean, Galuf dying was kind of sad, but at the same time, like
Yeah, Galuf dying is like the highlight of the story. Like as far as like absolute narrative wise, I'm not saying it's like a positive thing. I'm just saying
yeah,
like as far as the most impactful thing, that's like really cool because it's just like the no, I refuse to lose. I'm gonna beat you. Like
yeah.
determination. Sans Undertale, all that.
Sans Undertale.
You just go Sans Undertale on him, man.
Yeah, what a game Undertale is. Speaking
Yeah.
of bosses,
Which boss?
I don't know. They're all. I mean, the Undertale in general is very unique. So that's like its whole other like category by itself.
I really, really enjoy. I know it's not the actual final boss, but like the Asgore fight
Yeah,
in Undertale because I thought it was the final boss, and I did the classic like spent like 30 minutes trying to spare him
yeah.
when you just can't. And then also the like I have no idea why this is just like a my brain making a connection that isn't really there is like the very start of the fight, the little like intro to the song that starts playing, like before the song actually kicks in, it reminds me of like Wizards and Warriors,
Yeah.
like just from a sound standpoint. So it like hit this weird nostalgia button in me for no reason.
That reminds me, I saw on Twitter today they're bringing another one of those like dungeon crawl games here to America again. Nista
Oh,
is. It's the same company I think that made Strangers in Sword City,
ooh,
or Stranger of Sword City rather.
I really like that game.
Yeah, Savior of Sapphire Wings. I think it's the sequel.
Oh, okay,
Hmm.
awesome.
And it looks like you can get both games if I pre-order it. So I might just do that.
You should. Stranger in Sword City is really fun.
Yeah,
It's like a updated, modernized dungeon crawler that's still like hard and has BS, but it doesn't have like the super BS.
yeah. It doesn't have you just walk into a tile and die. My favorite.
Eh.
That happened to me in what's the game I was. It was in a wizardry game I was playing. I just walked in a tile and died basically
Yeah,
because it teleported me into a room like far from the exit, and everything was incredibly strong, and I died.
yeah. There's a that's a wizardry staple. I remember in Wizardry 1, there's like a few tiles in like the 6th or 7th floor that will teleport you into like a large room where all magic is sealed.
Yeah,
And then all the enemies in the area are like ninjas and samurai that can like critically hit and instantly kill your party members.
based.
And you can't even use like there's like a magic spell that like shows where you are on the map, but like you can't use it because magic's sealed and you
Yeah,
can't heal. So you have to like stumble out of the area, then figure out where you are. It's really great.
yeah. Speaking of the final boss thing, those dungeon crawling type games never have like very narratively appealing final bosses.
Well, Wizardry 1, I can talk about that final boss. I actually beat that game. Very, very weak narratively because the entire premise of Wizardry 1 is there's the evil wizard Warndra. I don't remember his exact name, but like the king's like, hey, go in and take care of this guy because he's bad or whatever. So you get down there. Everything leading up to him is insanely difficult. Like you don't want to fight any random encounters. It's a 10-floor dungeon crawler. That's it.
Yeah,
Everything on the 10th floor. The 10th floor is a hallway, a series of winding hallways, and every fight can like totally wipe your party. And then even if you win the fight, there are trapped chests, and some of them will have teleport traps, and you'll get teleported into a wall if you like misidentify it, and then you can't retrieve your party's corpses because they're in a wall, so you just completely lose that party.
I would just save cheese.
Yeah, no, I ended up doing that after I got to the 10th floor without cheesing the game at all. And then my party got teleported into a wall. And I was just like, nope. And I just like started like save cheesing because I'd already spent like 25, 30 hours on the game. I wasn't going to like completely re-level an entire new party up to that point. I already had to re-level a party to like fetch dead party members on like the seventh floor, and like two of their bodies had decayed, so they become unrevivable, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Like it's so stupid. But the final boss is a wizard, as described in the narrative, and he has a random number of vampires with him, like vampires and greater vampires. It does like the D&D thing where it just rolls a random number of enemies. So it's a variable difficulty final boss,
Nice.
and he's just a straight up like high level wizard, and so he can cast level 9 wizard spells. And the way magic works in wizardry, for those who don't know, is it's much like D&D, where it's just like roll 26-sided die, and that's what it is. So you get with massive damage ranges. Like the spells will do anywhere from like the strongest mage spell is just called like nuke or big bang or something like that, and it does like I think 60 to 240 damage, and your party's health totals at this point will be around probably 180 for your fighters and like 100 for your lower health classes. So he can just wipe your party because he just uses it, and he's just like, maybe it'll do 60 to everybody, maybe it'll do like 200 and kill everybody except like a really high vitality fighter. And then he's also just got a bunch of undead with him. So that's the fight. It's completely like luck-based BS, except one of the spells in the game is there's like wish spells, which if you play D&D, you just wish for help from a deity, and it usually comes at a great cost. In wizardry, there's like greater wish. It's either just wish or greater wish, but there's like 2 wish spells, and the higher level one, when you use it, it just costs a level to cast. But you're given like I think 4 or 5 things to select from, but one of the things you can pick is enemies can't cast spells. And it works on the final boss.
Makes sense.
And he's just a wizard. So the moment you cast that, he goes from casting like nukes that do 200 damage or 120 damage or whatever to like ineffectually trying to attack your fighter, and maybe he'll hit him for like 6 damage, and then you just beat the piss out of him because he's an old man that can't do anything.
See, that's deserved. That's every wizard in D&D should get owned like that.
Yeah. I mean, you still have to kill the vampires, but like that's not that big of a deal if he isn't nuking your party.
Yeah. That is like some classic like first or second edition D&D right there.
Yeah.
Where you have to know like some stupid cheese to kill the big bad because they're just ridiculously overpowered.
Yeah. I mean, you could just get lucky and he just never uses like a really powerful spell.
Yeah, that doesn't seem.
Or he just low rolls. Like, there's so many stupid ways. Like, that game is just. It's a 1980s dungeon crawler, man.
No,
that's definitely a weak narrative, stupid boss, right?
Yeah, even like the old like isometric RPGs from like the early 90s are just like brutal. Like you know Divinity Original Sin, right?
Yeah.
I've been trying to play, well, not recently, but I've tried to play like their original game they made, Divinity 1. And boy, that is a it's a hard game.
The only isometric RPG I've finished is Planescape.
Yeah.
And that game is 100% narrative. It's got the classic, you can just talk your way out of the final boss fight.
Oh, nice.
So I'm really glad I did that. Because obviously I made a save right before the dialogue with the final boss, and like, you don't want to fight it. You do not want to fight that final boss. Because the combat in the game itself is bad. It's AD&D.
Well, yeah, that would do it. AD&D is not friendly. I actually have AD&D books.
Oh, nice.
I found them at a secondhand bookstore like a year ago. I have like the player's manual, the Dungeon Master's Guide, and I think a monster manual, and then like a lore expansion book.
The art in those books are really cool.
Yeah, it's really old school. Like the lore expansion I have is like Norse god stuff. And it has like shirtless Zeus with like a 6-pack on the front cover.
As he should be.
Not Zeus, Thor, rather.
As he should be.
Yeah.
Either way.
He's like riding like a Pegasus, not a Pegasus. Did Valkyries ride Pegasus?
Well, Thor isn't a Valkyrie, so
yeah. Well, this particular, I say Thor, but it's just like a bearded, muscular man with a hammer. So I don't know.
Okay.
Yeah. D&D's version of Thor riding a Pegasus.
Yeah.
I'm trying to, so to go back to bosses in general. I mean, we were talking about like just because I think there's a lot to talk about just bosses too, besides final bosses, because oftentimes games will have bosses that are way cooler than the actual final boss.
Yeah.
Um, and I have a specific example I could talk about here. So in the third Legend of Heroes game, do I even need to bring up this particular example? Okay, no.
I don't know.
So in one of the Legend of Heroes games, called Trails to Azure, there is this boss, not the final boss, although the final boss is pretty cool, but I'm not going to talk about it. Uh, so there's this boss. Her name is Aryan Rod, and she's like a female knight.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't actually know that she's a female knight, though, to start with, because she has a helmet on. And you have to fight her at the top of like this one tower because you're trying to um, stop these bells from ringing.
Uh-huh.
And so you're fighting her, and the fight is actually basically supposed to be impossible to win.
Oh, okay.
Uh, but the reason it's cool is if you lower her HP enough, it actually breaks her helmet. So
Oh,
you get to see who she is.
so it's just like a narrative thing.
Yeah, it's a narrative thing, but like you don't get to know that unless you do well enough in the fight.
It's kind of cool.
Yeah, and there's a whole big narrative on who she is. I'm not going to talk about it because it's spoilers, like big
Oh,
spoilers.
okay.
But
That's nice of you.
yeah, I don't want to bring up who she actually is because it's
um, I think kind of going back to final. I don't have a good segue. Going back to final bosses, I think another thing that can kind of like to the detriment of a lot of final bosses is when there's optional bosses in a game,
yeah,
because what ends up happening is the optional bosses are stronger. You have to get strong enough to do the optional bosses, and it completely trivializes the final boss. But at the same time, every time I'm aware of those two options, if I ever tell myself, oh, I'll just beat the final boss, then I'll load my save and go back and do the other stuff, like that never happens. I will never beat a final boss, then load my save and do all the optional stuff. Like once I've seen the credits,
yeah, it's
like
done.
the game is over. So that's definitely something where, don't get me wrong, I love optional bosses because then that lets them go into the we're gonna make this really hard, or we're gonna make a puzzle fight where you have to like use your brain and stuff. But at that point the final boss just becomes like a little victory lap. And even if it had something cool going on, you can just sort of like steamroll it at that point. Um, there are a few games that get around that. The Last Remnant is the one that pops in my head immediately. So that game, the final boss, I think it has 6 different versions, and it might be like 10. I don't remember exactly, but the final boss gets stronger based on percentage of side quests you've done.
That's
And
interesting.
he's called the Conqueror, and his ultimate form is called like the True Final Conqueror or something. And you only get that form if you've done 100% of side quest, which is like wiki territory,
Yeah,
right? So it's just really cool that they have like this, and the Last Remnant is like one of my favorite RPGs. Like at some point we'll do like a Last Remnant episode, probably just so I can talk about the game for like 2 hours. But it's basically a saga game, and everything, like it's a scaling game, like this difficulty scales with you. So it's cool that the final boss itself scales based on like how much you've done throughout the game. That's really cool. And then I think, doesn't Sephiroth get really really strong if you're level 99 or something?
I believe I think he scales based on your level, doesn't he?
I'm like 90% sure Sephiroth scales, and then I know,
Which is a good mechanic.
yeah, and then in the Final Fantasy One remake, Chaos will scale as well.
I believe that's true.
Yeah. So scaling final bosses are kind of cool. The only problem with like scaling things in RPGs in general, when they have them, is, and I'm going to use Last Remnant as an example, and I'm just going to talk about a regular enemy, but this can apply to bosses too. Like when most RPGs do level scaling, the way they have it is like this enemy will be here from level 1 to 40, and then this enemy will be here from 41 to 80. The problem is when you get to that area at level 41 and that enemy just destroys you because you hit that threshold, right?
Yeah, it doesn't work very well when you have like a large level range.
Yeah.
I will say that in a not JRPG uh, comparison here, I think like the system works pretty well in like Bethesda games.
Because that's more of a gradual scaling.
Well, because the levels, at least in Fallout games, is like not that high of a level cap. So
Oh, you're talking about Fallout. Okay.
yeah. Because like in Fallout 3, like you have like the certain basic enemies, and they just like slowly scale up based on your level. But like the thing about Fallout is levels they're important, but you only get like 20 of them, and it's more your gear that matters. And
Yeah, I thought you were talking about like Oblivion, and I'm like, Oblivion's like one of the worst examples.
well, Oblivion has lots of issues with enemy difficulty. The game is
Like,
basically impossible on max difficulty unless you cheese.
but just like the way leveling works in Oblivion, like you can get bad levels, and then enemies will outscale you, and like the game just becomes like impossible and unfun.
Yeah, we don't talk about Oblivion.
Oh, my bad.
No, I mean like the leveling system. Regarding the leveling system.
But yeah, like scaling bosses and scaling stuff in RPGs is okay if it's done like with some level of thought put into it, right?
Not Oblivion.
Yeah. What other bosses?
The strategy to beat Oblivion on max difficulty is just to like summon and stay as low level as possible. It's really funny.
I've never touched the difficulty slider in that game because the default one is like hard enough. Because that game is just like, I don't know. I'm gonna go ahead and call this.
There's not much skill involved in Oblivion, right?
No.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of games with not much skill and JRPGs, Gwen from Dark Souls.
Yes.
Is a final boss.
What a final boss he is.
I really like the fight. Dark Souls. I know you we talked about it. You don't think it's a JRPG or whatever.
It's close enough.
I was just gonna say, yeah, I don't care. I'm going to talk about it anyway. So I'm glad that you're agreeing. That is a game that is like very weak narratively, and I'm sure some random person is going to listen to this in 2 years and be like, no, it's not.
Did you read the item descriptions?
Yeah, no, it's okay. I opened up the wiki and read everything that everybody inferred from item descriptions. Don't worry, I believe you. Very, very, very powerful atmosphere. The narrative itself sucks.
Yeah, to chime in on this, I think the narrative of Gwyn is not too bad though.
Yeah, I was just talking as a whole though.
Yeah.
Overall, the game, like the narrative is like really, really bad, but the atmosphere is like when people were like, "Oh, the story's good," it's like, no, you mean the atmosphere is good.
Yeah.
Like there's a lot of things you can infer and all this other stuff, and everyone has headcanon, but the Gwen fight itself, just being this kind of like, you get to it and you're like, and I don't know why you're expecting this, but it's the final boss of an RPG. You're expecting some sort of like cutscene or dialogue, or like everyone that's played a JRPG, like the final boss always freaking monologues at you, right?
Yeah.
And you walk through the fog gate and like it just starts playing like a sad piano tune. He just starts walking at you, and then you're in a fight. You're like, oh, wow, this is just like really weird. And it's just like a one-on-one fight with someone that's about your size.
Yeah, I mean, when I fought Gwen, he basically just jumped at me as soon as I walked in the door.
He leaps at you from across the room. And then, like, yeah, if you want to cheese them with parrying, you can. But the fight itself is decently fun. So it's not like a big deal. But then, like, the fight's just over.
Yeah.
And it's just a very interesting narrative choice. But at least he's the final boss, unlike Dark Souls 2, where I remember when I beat that game and the credits started rolling, I was confused. I
Yeah.
didn't even know I was fighting the final boss.
Well, that's Dark Souls 2 in a nutshell. You don't know what the hell's going on in that game. See, when it comes to Souls games, I actually think Dark Souls 1 probably has like the strongest narrative, even though it's like pretty weak still. Like Bloodborne has no narrative as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
like like you just like do stuff in Bloodborne and like eventually the final boss pops up and you're like, okay, and now I'm a slug. All right.
Ah, slug life.
That game makes no sense.
I mean, that's like I said, man, that's how I felt in Dark Souls 2. It was just like, oh, this area down here opened up. Oh, there's this like Grim Reaper looking thing in a dress, and I killed it really fast because I was like doing like a miracles build,
Yeah.
and so I just killed it in like 5 hits or whatever with like the lightning blade, and then the credits started playing, and I had no idea what I just fought or why that was the final boss or anything. So that was
Well,
cool.
that's from software. I'm actually like very curious, like how good of a narrative their game they're doing with George R. R. Martin is going to be because they actually have like a writer on board, and it's not
Yeah,
just nonsense.
that'll be interesting.
Because like Dark Souls is just like here's the setting, we put some bosses in it, and go have fun.
Yeah. Uh, Another interesting thing with final bosses, and this is more of an SMT thing off the top of my head, is when there's different routes and
Yeah,
there's different final bosses, because then, like, inevitably one of them will be harder than the rest, right?
yeah,
And so at that point, how do you judge the final boss, quote unquote, of the game, right? Because, like, for example, in Strange Journey, the DS game, I'm only talking about the original, I haven't played the remake. There's two different final bosses, and one of them is like really easy, and the other one is really hard. Like the really hard one, I didn't really struggle with Strange Journey. Like I did Law Route for anyone curious, and I just remember playing through the game, never really getting walled by anything. I get to the final boss, and I straight up could not kill it because in Nocturne or in SMT games, like your damage is based off of your level and whatever stat. So it's like strength plus level for physical attacks, right?
yeah.
Or it's just like the level difference between you and an enemy. I wasn't a high enough level to out damage the boss's heal move that they were using every other turn.
That
And
sucks.
so I had to go and like grind like 10 levels so that I could actually like damage the boss. Which to me, like, if the person is like, I'm gonna call myself good enough. If the player is good enough to get to the final boss and it's not like an optional boss, I would think that they should be able to have tools at their disposal to like kill the boss at that point, and they shouldn't have to grind,
Yeah, like
right?
if you can kill encounters relatively easy before the final boss, why is it so hard? Yeah, I understand.
And before anyone that hasn't played Strange Journey, that's like, just use buffs, you idiot. The move that the boss was using that healed themselves also canceled all buffs and debuffs.
That's not good design.
Yeah. So like I would spend an entire turn buffing and debuffing so that I could even hurt the boss and I wouldn't die immediately. And then I would spend a turn attacking and then the boss would heal and cancel all buffs and debuffs. And it's like, well, that's cool. And then they'd also attack me and I'd have to spend a turn healing. So yeah.
So
But then there's people that, so that thing I mentioned about damage being a level difference thing,
yeah,
there's people that will fused like level 10 demons that have just a bunch of reflect stuff on them, and they'll like reflect the final boss's attacks on them and kill them. That's like the way they cheesed it.
that sounds like an Atlas game right there.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. I
So
think they fixed it in the remake, but
the so to talk about another Atlas boss, so the final boss of Etrian Odyssey 4. And this is a thing I don't like in final bosses. This is why I'm bringing it up. So the final boss of Etrian Odyssey 4 is basically like two hands and a head, right?
yeah,
Classic final boss. In Etrian Odyssey, there are skills that bind like body parts.
yep,
And since this boss is a head and two hands, you could basically bind its head and bind its hands, like with like
Okay.
100% success rate if you have a character spec for it. And basically, like the boss doesn't exist, and
Oh, so it's like
it's clever, I guess. Like I'm using air quotes right now that they did it because like it's always cool to have like a secret thing to the boss, but like it makes it so easy. Like I don't like that.
yeah. I mean, you could just not do it, right?
Yeah, but I mean,
Uh-huh.
I do anything that I get the opportunity to do in a video
You
game.
just
So
do it and complain about it,
yeah, I do
like
it
the
and complain
classic
about it.
gamer moment.
Yeah. I've only beaten the game once, and I did the cheese because I figured it out.
Yeah, that's fair. Another you mentioning a head in two hands reminds me the Dragon Quest VI final boss is probably the hardest Dragon Quest final boss, I think. He has three forms.
What about Dragon Quest XI without the Sword of Light?
That just needs grinding.
True.
Like I did that. I did that. So I don't. I like, and I beat Dragon Quest VI uh, as well. Like Dragon Quest VI was just felt harder than 11 because 11 I was like, oh, I'm just gonna go grind. Like it was just like this is kind of stupid. But Dragon Quest VI, it's like a three-part fight,
Yeah.
and the third part is two hands and a head, and so the boss gets three turns. If you know anything about Dragon Quest, most bosses get two.
Yeah.
So the moment the boss starts getting three and he's using all this crap, it's insane. And then one of the hands can cast revive. So if you don't already know which hand you need to kill first, like you'll go all out on one of the parts, right? And then the hand will just revive it and then you'll get killed because you like were trying to like just kill one part, so you got it down to two attacks.
Yeah. Yeah. I know what you
And
mean because I've
just
played other
slog.
games with that.
Like Chrono Trigger did the same thing, right? The final Lavos thing, like the actual core is like one of the little things on the right that you got to kill, and you're like, why isn't it the centerpiece? Are you kidding me? Which Chrono Trigger's final boss is another good one to talk about because that's just a cool fight.
Yeah, I think Lavos as like a concept is the coolest part of that game because you can basically fight him like at several points in the game.
Yeah, like
Um,
on New Game Plus, you can fight him whenever. It's
yeah,
pretty cool.
and it's just like I think it's like the only game you can do that. I mean, just like end the game prematurely.
Um, well, there's that one really really bad Xbox 360 game that I can't remember. Two Worlds.
Oh, that game, the Oblivion ripoff.
Yeah, you can end the game. The speedrun for that game is like 5 or 10 minutes because there is. I'm like doing this off of memory from like 7 or 8 years ago. I've never played the game, but basically, once you get into the first town, the final villain is there, and he like taunts you and like tries to run away, like kind of like cutscene style.
Yeah,
But there's something you can do where you can aggro the townspeople to all attack him,
yeah, I remember hearing about that.
and he gets beat up by like 30 commoners and dies, and then you beat the game. It's
Uh,
really weird.
it just that just reminds me of like the Pathfinder and D&D like how many like if you have enough level 1 heroes you can just like kill like the highest level creature in the game because odds are some of them will roll a crit.
Have you ever seen that Reddit post or whatever about the peasant railgun?
Yeah, I think so.
I'll go ahead and explain it since I brought it up so people don't have to look at it. So basically in D&D, there are actions take certain amounts of time, but there are what's called free actions, which take no time. The classic one is like talking, like you just want to say something,
Yeah,
right? Like another free, I can't think of other free actions, but there's just things you can think
dropping a
of where
weapon.
like, yeah, just letting go of something, right?
Yeah.
And in whatever edition that this person was talking about, like handing someone something was a free action. And so they theorized that if you had enough peasants in a long enough line, because handing someone something is a free action, if they all just passed like a javelin down this line of like 10,000 peasants, they like calculated that, you know, you could throw the javelin at this equivalent speed of a railgun and it would like be able to kill anything in one hit if they hit it because it would be moving so fast.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
it's just like stupid little rules, things like that, where you're like, that wouldn't probably work the way that said, but it's cool to think about.
Yeah,
To convince people to,
there's a lot of silly things that you can do in tabletop systems.
yeah.
And some of them actually do work as by the rules, but you have to let the DM let you do it. So
Yeah. Yeah, DM overrides all.
yeah, if it's not explicitly in the book, I'm gonna be like, nah.
Yeah. Um. So, kind of going back to the first thing you said, where you kill God.
Yes.
SMT4A, the final boss is Yahweh, and he's just like it's a two-part fight, but it's really weird because it's the first fight in the game where you have two parties, and it's the last fight in the game.
Yeah.
And your second party is determined based on the route you're on, but basically he has like a bunch of different resistances, and the secondary party has like the MacGuffin sword, where as they hit him, it randomly lowers resistances so you can hit him and like start doing actual damage.
Uh-huh.
So it's just like a two-part fight where like you take a turn as your party, then he goes. You take a turn as the other party, then he goes, and it's like just kind of alternates back and forth. And so you kind of have to make sure you never set up each other party to get killed by him. Like you have to maintain like debuffs on him and all this other stuff. And then SMT4 and 4A also do this thing where like bosses will have dialogue, and based on how you answer the dialogue, good or bad things will happen, which is kind of cool, but also kind of stupid because it just leads to like min-maxing. Because like, you know, like sometimes a boss will like say something and like maybe you like want to glare at him, right? But that'll just like enrage him and raise his attack. It's like, well, what if I want to just be a badass and glare at him and the game's going to penalize? It's like that. It's like the anti D&D mindset, right?
Yeah.
Where like, if I were to say to the DM like, "Oh, I'm going to glare at him" or whatever, the DM would be like, "Oh, that's kind of cool," and he would just narrate it and keep going. But in SMT, it's like, no, his attack went up because like you looked him in the eye. It's like, whatever, man. Like, why are you even giving me this option? Like, that's so stupid.
Yeah, it's actually like my favorite part about D&D, in like tabletop gaming in general, is just like coming up with some stupid thing like that you can do creatively, and the DM's just like, all right, fine, sure, have fun.
Yeah, exactly. But the final boss in 4A is just weird because, like I said, it's the first time you have this two-party setup, so you're just like getting used to it, right? And then the fight itself is a two-parter, and it's really long. And the second form can just like decide to kill you if you get unlucky.
I hate designs like that.
Which is also true of the final boss in Nocturne, if you're doing true demon ending. But like,
okay, so speaking of instant death final boss things, there's actually like, I think a good design way that like you can do it.
Okay,
so
I'm ready.
In the Legend of Heroes games, a lot of the final bosses will like blatantly broadcast they're going to wipe your whole party next turn. Yeah. Like the next turn they get. And in almost every single Legend of Heroes game, you have a way to like cast a spell or use a supercraft that can basically give your entire party damage immunity for a turn.
Yeah.
So I like that because you have to actually like keep the resource available to prevent yourself from dying. But
yeah, that's fair. But like the final boss in Nocturne, right? Like he gets 2 turns per round or whatever, and like if he removes buffs and debuffs in one turn, and then the next turn like he uses his 2 most powerful attacks, like he's just going to kill your party.
Yeah.
And granted, the odds aren't super high that he does it, but it's a very long fight, so it could happen, right? And then the final boss in 4A also just has something. He just has similar things where he can just like maximize his stats and do other stuff. And like, if you're unlucky, like he'll just like wipe your party, stuff like that. Like I remember when I beat him, like in Mark, I was streaming it, and in Markro, who's the speedrunner of the game, was like, I cannot believe how stupid lucky you are. I wish I had luck that good when I played this. Just like So I was like, dude, I don't know what you're talking about, man. Like, this fight's easy. And then, like, I just watched other people do the fight, and I was like, I got really lucky.
Yeah.
But then, like, I watched my good Undertale buddy, the LCC. He was streaming Nocturne like a month ago. He had like the luckiest final boss fight I've ever seen in my life, dude. I was just like, he beat it his first try, and like he got insanely lucky. And I was just like, everyone in his chat was like, I can't believe how lucky you are, and he was just like, eh. But I could tell he was kind of like annoyed because everyone was just really like, the only reason why you beat that fight was because you were lucky. And like, I kind of agreed with them, but at the same time, it's like, well, he didn't like do anything stupid. He just like didn't get owned. Like,
Yeah. Maybe
there's,
the game should be designed so you don't just randomly get owned.
yeah, but like the point of watching people play Nocturne on hard is watching them get owned
True.
because you suffered. It's like when you play, if anyone's ever played WoW on a PvP server, as you level up, you get owned by like max level cap people, right? So then when you get level capped, you want to go back and do it to other people.
Yeah.
Suffer as I suffer.
I remember in RuneScape back in the day doing that to people in the wilderness.
Yeah.
Just walking up to them and just one-shotting them.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
Oh, that reminds me. The other thing I did, I'm going to have to find a link to this. This is going back to the start of what I did this week, was me and my good buddy MPG. We did a Nocturne Demon tier list. It was like a 3.5-hour video.
Oh, no.
Every demon. So I'll have to put that in the. And anyone that like manages to sit through this podcast would probably enjoy that video.
Yeah,
it's just us like talking. I've been wanting to do it for a while, and then like I messaged him randomly yesterday. He's like, "Yeah, sure, I'll do it." And I was like, I like set it up. I was like, "Dude, this is gonna take like 3 hours, man." He's like, "That's fine."
Tier lists are like the highest quality level of like shit posting on the internet.
I feel like we took it. It's a good list. Like it wasn't like, I feel like if anyone that's not an idiot would agree with us is what I'm saying. You know?
Okay. So it's not like when people make tier lists of like the best vegetables at the grocery store.
Yeah, no, it's object. We labeled it as the objectively correct Nocturne tier list.
Oh man.
Like the S tier is called Stream Monster tier.
Okay.
Because it's what all the stream monsters tell you to use, even though you didn't ask for their help. So, stuff like that.
I can't wait to see what if it blows up. I can't wait to see what the comment section's like.
Yeah, I don't know if it's on YouTube yet, but I don't know how the algorithm works for random videos that get uploaded, because I would love to see it blow up and have. Man, he hasn't uploaded it. I'm gonna have to yell at him to tell him to upload it to
The
YouTube.
thing is about uploading on YouTube, for some reason, like you can't copy tags anymore. Like I like when there was recent episode, I had to manually type in all the stupid tags because you can copy them again. Why was it broken the other day? Hello YouTube.
I don't know.
I thought they just like removed the feature, and now I have to go back and fix the video from last week now. No.
But I mean, I can talk about final bosses for like 2 more hours, but we've been talking for over an hour, so
We have, it's true.
it is the about an hour podcast.
Yeah, this isn't the about 3 hours podcast. I don't think I could handle about 3 hours. I think I would run out of things to. Like my brain would just shut off unless I like had like something silly like a tier list to keep it going.
Yeah, that's what you need, man.
Yep.
Maybe if this lasts long enough, we can do a episode tier list.
I think episode 3 would be high up there.
Which one was that?
I believe it's the Dragon Quest one.
Oh yeah, of course.
Yeah, no, Dragon Quest was episode 2. My bad. Episode 3 was us talking about how Dark Souls isn't a JRPG.
Well, you were talking about how it is in the JRPG. And then Dream Boom preemptively owned you.
That was actually a hilariously good timing on Twitter.
Yeah.
All right. That's all for this week. See you guys next week.
Later.